want to jump into a roundtable discussion right now, and just to share some of our thoughts and sort of some of the discussions that come up through discussions that we have out on farms around the Fraser Valley and in British Columbia. I'm going to start out by asking the question. It's my experience, I quite often see as it pertains to mattresses and waterbeds, I tend to see farms over sawdust once they get waterbeds or once they get mattresses. I think the whole purpose of putting in a waterbed or a mat is to reduce a consumable product, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. You guys, is this your experience, Gray? Do you see this as well, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say that the purpose of any bedding medium or bedding mattress is to, first and foremost, make a comfortable place for the cow to rest. That being said, after that, it's how do we do that using as little bedding as possible? How do we do that in a sustainable way? And as I said earlier, what goes into your barn has to come out. So from an equipment perspective, when I see overbedding, I worry that we're putting more bedding into the alley than needs be. That means that our manure system is going to need to get that to storage, and the storage is going to have to be there to handle that. So that's kind of how I see it affecting the manure system. But maybe Denis could speak to whether there's any impact on the cows when you overbed.
I wouldn't say necessarily that there's impact on the cows. It's really more on an economical side, and seeing, if you chose the certain type of bedding, whether it's DCC waterbeds or another types of Huber mats, and the goal was to reduce that usage of shavings or sawdust, then if you're just applying the same amount, then you're obviously not going to see the same benefits. So in terms of cow health, I don't think it necessarily has negative or extra benefits to over applying it on a good bed. So yeah, I think it's definitely more on economical side.
Right on. Guys, I think one of the questions that probably that we should really talk about and have a look at is when we look at something like sand bedding, how does sand bedding or sand in the barn impact the relationship with the robot? Gray, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, this is where I should say, well, it depends on the robot. But there is a very real increased cost, with operating any machine in sand as opposed to not. As Ralph alluded to in his talk about the manure equipment, which is probably where sand manifests itself most, is you're dealing with an abrasive fluid. So anywhere steel meets sand, wear is going to happen. It's real, and you should plan for it. So with the Lely robot, by virtue of the robot arm design, our mothership, which hangs out below the cow during a milking process, actually has very few moving parts on it. All the major cylinders that control that arm movement are high and dry further up on the arm. So it's really the ropes that hold that tether, actually, the teacups to the mothership. They get changed out for a stainless steel chain. The rollers that those ropes typically run on get changed for a stainless steel roller. And then we change those parts out as part of our routine maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big piece with this also, it really comes down to, and Denis talked a lot about it, about being, watching your management style. And I think that's really what it comes down to. At the end of the day, it's really important that dairymen, when on sand, take a much more proactive approach to their maintenance as opposed to a reactive approach, where usually by that time you've probably already got a significant problem that needs to be dealt with. And although proactive maintenance feels sometimes difficult because you're putting out expenses in order to prevent something from happening. And when we're preventing something from happening, we don't actually ever feel the pain of it happening. So, but I think the flip side is that when something does break down or wear down in this case, the cost can be significantly higher. So again, taking a much more proactive approach to your maintenance on all your manure equipment becomes, I think, critical in that whole situation. I don't, Denis, do you have any thoughts from that side of things with the cows?
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. Taking that proactive approach, and this is something that's part of my role as well. Especially when somebody is either going to sand, going into a new barn with robots and sand, and was never in a sand bedding type. This is something that I try to coach, teach, or however we want to say it, but during startup and after startup to teach those day-to-day activities, to do a proper maintenance on the robots to limit the wear and tear, and also prevent unnecessary alarms or breakdowns or anything that would prevent the robot from whatever we bought it for. Right, so this is really part of my job, and it's part of the farm management department to show our customers and robot dairy farmers how to optimize that.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead. Great. Yeah, go ahead.
I wouldn't mind talking to that a little bit here. I think you guys covered, pretty good. One thing I would caution people or advise people to think about is think about the day. We saw the modular oil bath on the what was James Way, now Valmetal pumps. That's something with bearings in it and seals, and it will need to be changed eventually. And if you think about what does that day look like, well, if you change it preemptively, one could argue that you had more life left in that oil bath, and maybe that could be the case. However, if you're changing it on a planned basis, chances are you're going to be prepared. You're going to do this during reasonable hours, not after hours on a holiday. And it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience. And often doing things in a planned manner is going to, in the end, be cost equivalent or more cost effective. Meanwhile, be a way more enjoyable experience for the people who work on the farm. And I think more importantly, for the cows, they never have to experience, a dirty burn for a few days because you're trying to deal with an oil bath that has destructed itself. If you get in there and change the seals out in a preventative manner, you can often avoid larger scale damage to, let's say, the bearings.
Right on. Sort of along the lines of sand, guys, I think let's talk a little bit about the climate in British Columbia. I think sand is used all throughout Canada. However, in the British Columbia climate, it does seem to be very effective. Gray, do you want to talk to us a little bit about why we think it works well in British Columbia, and particularly in the Fraser Valley?
Yeah, totally. One of the great things we have is, maybe we have 1 or 2 weeks of really sub-zero weather where we have to worry about something like a sand lane freezing. Aside from that, the other 50 weeks, we're good to go, and our lane can operate, as normal, and we can recover bedding. Another huge advantage, as Ralph mentioned, we're trying to keep the fluid going to the flume as liquidy as possible. So we're often adding water to our reception pit to aid in that. And when you get 5 or 6 feet of rainwater over the course of a winter, it certainly makes it so you have a convenient place in the form of your long-term storage, if you have an uncovered storage, to get water back into your manure system without adding any water that wasn't there already. So these are 2 huge advantages. And I think that's one of the reasons sand is so prevalent here in British Columbia.
So, Gray, farms that are recovering sand, when the sand is out to dry, do we typically see a cover over top of the reclaimed sand, or are we seeing a roof of some kind, or are we leaving it open to the elements?
We're definitely seeing an evolution of the sand lanes, so I can give you an answer, and maybe my opinion on that will change in a year or so. But the way I've seen it, based on, the 5 years or so that we've had sand lanes around, is it's not super important to cover that sand. That sand is going to spend a month or two from the time it comes out of the sand lane until the time it goes back into the barn. And during that amount of time, it's going to be amalgamated from the pile from one clean out, amalgamated with other piles, get higher. Higher is drier in terms of sand storage. And sometimes the rainwater washing our pile, isn't a bad thing at all. So in my experience, it's not critical to cover the sand. However, I do see people wanting to do that, especially with their sand that's clean and ready to go back into the barn. And I don't see a problem with that at all.
Cool. I'm going to kind of pass this one a little bit over to Denis here. This is kind of an obvious question, but I think it deserves to be asked. Obviously, wet sand is equally as bad as wet sawdust. Would we be correct in saying that?
It's not great. Obviously, you want your bedding to be as dry as possible, no matter what type of bedding you're using. This always limits the spread of bacteria or pathogens or mastitis within your bed surface. So yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily as bad. Definitely, wet shavings is probably a better conducer of those bacteria and pathogens. So, but same thing, the same principle applies. You for sure want it to ideally be as dry as possible. Ideally, 95% dry matter is kind of your goal or your aim for putting sand back into your barn.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I know a lot of farms around the valley and around British Columbia have different methods of raising their young stock. I'm going to kind of push this question over to Denis. Do you think it's important for farms that are raising their own young stock to have the same type of bedding in heifer space that they would in a milk cow barn? Now, obviously, you're going to have young stock on a pack for a period of time, but once they reach the age of getting in a stall, should a young cow be on mats, both in that heifer barn or heifer space as well as in the milk cow barn, or do you see a problem with there being variance in any of that?
I think the biggest issue with having a variance in different bedding types that you might put in either a young stock versus milking cows or dry cows, it's mostly in terms of your day-to-day practice and day-to-day practice and the cow comfort, the animal comfort. I think that a lot of times the young stock and heifers or pre-milking heifers are regarded as like the side business, and we don't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention. We kind of walk through the barn pretty quickly and either don't bed as well or don't invest as much money in the bedding type. But I do believe that I think if we're going to go with, say, DCC waterbeds in the dairy barn, it's probably a good idea to maybe put it, maybe not necessarily before like breeding age, but after breeding age, invest in that comfort so that those heifers don't come in with hock sores or injured knees or injured, any types of leg injury once they first calve. So I think that money is going to be beneficial for first lactation and on after. So I think, keeping that management practice the same throughout the barn is going to be helpful and is going to be beneficial for those cows later on.
Yeah, I think, I think one of the overall themes here that we've kind of talked about today is really just about the consistency in our management practices, right? Sure. So we talk about this in regards to the milking robot all the time. The cows love consistency. They don't love change, but they certainly really appreciate consistency. And as long as it's the same, you will see benefits or less stress related to the move into a milk cow barn or
Yeah.
with other early lactation cows, right? So,
Definitely.
I totally agree. But again, it kind of comes down to that central theme that we have at West Coast Robotics, where, and at Lately as well, we believe wholeheartedly in making the milking experience or the space in the barn. Gray, what's that saying that you say, that we just visit the barn, but the cows live there? And so it's their home, and it should be as comfortable as it could possibly be for them. So again, just consistency in everything that's being done, from management practices to how the cow's being milked to the stalls that they're living in throughout their life cycle, I think is really critical in success. We're going to kind of start to wrap up here a little bit, so I'm going to put everybody on the spot. We'll start with Denis, and then we'll go to Gray, and then I'll share my thoughts. Denis, if you were starting up a farm today and you had the freedom and flexibility to do whatever you wanted to do, what would you do for stall bedding?
It's a good question. I'm probably gonna go with the unpopular answer here, but I'm gonna answer it solely based on my side of my work, and what I've always done is always think about the cow first. And maybe when I come to that point, I would choose something else. But if I'm thinking cow first, I'm always thinking, what would she do naturally? And the most natural, basically, way to house a cow would be, to me, on a bedded pack. And I would have, again, as we mentioned in the different segments throughout the day, I would adapt my management to that. It's probably not the best choice for West Coast Robotics, but but yeah, like I said, I'm only saying this in terms of cow health, and I'm thinking about the cow solely. So that would be my answer.
What about you, Gray? What do you think?
I think it would be nice to just have a robot, as long as it was summer, sitting in a field and not even a barn, which probably sounds ironic coming from someone who has been involved with the design and sale of many barns. But realistically, I would probably choose sand for me personally. But you need to keep in mind that that's going to align with my values. I'm sure during parts of Ralph's presentation, when he's explaining oil seals and pump curves and all that, a lot of people are thinking, geez, this is kind of boring. But for me, I kind of geek out on that stuff a bit, and I would enjoy having that equipment around. I enjoy the challenge of trying to design a system to do what many people find difficult, recover sand and do it in a low maintenance way. And that's what I would like to see in my barn for traction reasons. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah,
and yourself, Mitch, though, I'd be careful.
Yeah.
And you're, what are you, 1 year into it?
1 year in, yeah. I think, honestly, for me, I would probably go with Waterbeds. I think from a cow health perspective, I really see the benefits in the product. From an economical perspective, I really see the benefit in minimizing a disposable product. I think it makes the function or the ecosystem that is the barn more efficient. I also think that from a lifestyle perspective, when you have a bedding situation like Waterbeds, you're going to be cleaning stalls less, and you're going to be bedding stalls less. And for me, that's something that I think would be important to my management styles. So that's probably where that's probably the direction I would go. And I'm sure people that I've had discussion with this about would probably say, yeah, I've leaned that way in that discussion with others. So, but again, I wouldn't push anything on anybody, because as we've clearly established today, everyone's management style is completely different.
Exactly.
So
it's got to be adapted to that management style.
Exactly. Right. And so generally, in most deals that we work on, guys come to the table with a pretty good idea of what they want to do and what's important to them. And I think that really, is key in making good decisions. Is what are your values? What is important to you? And when I ask that question, I think that's really what I wanted to get out of that. That there's no right or wrong answer
Yeah,
when it
totally.
comes to, when it comes to betting.
100%.
That you know we're all three guys standing here. We all have a varying opinion for various reasons. So I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, and I would also say, you know, you got to work with what you have as well. You know, if you inherited a burn that was a challenge, let's say you have very little power around, and it's going to be difficult to recover sand because you can't get those big horsepower flumes. You could do a sawdust bedded burn. Something like Waterbeds would be probably my preference in that situation, and you could have a really simple burn cleaner into a pit system, very low maintenance, and that could work very well. So it's also about maximizing, you know, leveraging what you have to work with. I would say is pretty important too.
Yeah, to go along with that, I'd say managing working with what you have to work with. For me, you know, I said what I would choose, but at the same time, I think really when it comes down to it, I would probably go with what kind of expertise do I have around me, right? So if I have somebody like Gray that's got a lot of experience with the manure reclamation, or you know, what do I have around me? What do I have as support, and what do I have as expertise to support me in my decision and in the management that I want to do for my farm? This in the end, that's probably what would make my decision in terms of what betting type I would go with, right?
Yeah. Well, right on, guys.
All right.
Great discussion. I guess we'll kick it back over to Gray here to wrap it up.